The first is about something that happened almost 100 years ago. In 1921 in Jersey City, there was a prize fight. And it was between two of the great heavyweight boxers of that era, a Frenchman named Georges Carpentier and Jack Dempsey, maybe one of the greatest heavyweights of all time. And at the time, there was a young man named David Sarnoff who worked for a company called RCA. And RCA was then the nation's largest manufacturer of radio sets. And radio was in its infancy then, but it worked. You could buy a radio set and there was programming. There was classical music and there was news. But the industry was really struggling. And it was struggling because no one was buying radios. So Sarnoff is this young guy. He's working for RCA, and he goes to his bosses and he says, look, I've got this great idea. Let's broadcast the boxing event live. Now, no one had ever done this before. There'd never been a live broadcast of a sporting event before. It's a wholly new idea. And Sarnoff is just jumping up and down with enthusiasm, and he goes to the board of RCA, which is all of these guys with long gray beards, white beards. On the East Coast, older people are involved in business. I don't know if you know this, but it's possible to be over 50 and play a meaningful role in the American economy, but only if you're on the East Coast. So he gives this whole plan, and they look at him and they say, that is the stupidest idea we've ever heard. But he's really, really emphatic, and he goes back the next day and the next day and the next day, and finally, just to shut him up, they say, all right, you can do it, but you're on your own. So he goes, and he realizes he needs a radio transmitter, so he basically actually steals one from this army base nearby. Not the first time, by the way, something has been stolen in Jersey City. And then he realizes he needs someone to be the announcer. And there's never been a live broadcast before. He needs a so he has to find someone to be the first play-by-play person. And he finds someone who knows about boxing. And then he goes to the sales staff of RCA and he says, look, I need you to put up radios in bars and union halls and cafeterias and restaurants. Wherever there are people, there's got to be a radio on the wall so they can listen to what's going on. So he cobbles all this thing together, and he puts together this makeshift broadcast booth in Jersey City, and on the night of this prize fight, he broadcasts the first broadcast of a major sporting event in American history. And in the days that follow and weeks that follow, an extraordinary thing happens, and that is that radio takes off. It goes from this technology that people were not terribly interested in into the dominant media force that it continues to be to this day. Right? He transforms that industry. He takes it from a place that was way down here to this extraordinarily important media presence in the United States. Now, why does he succeed at doing that? What's going on with that? What's so special about that broadcast that allows it to serve as the catalyst for this transformation of the world of radio? Well, the answer is that he reframes how customers thought about this technology. Right? If you talk to an American in 1920 about what they thought radio was, they would say, well, radio is a very expensive box, and it was a huge box. It was, it's probably this high and this big back then. It's a very expensive box that allows me to listen to the news. And if you talk to an American in 1920, the last thing they needed was another way of getting the news. The country was inundated with news. Each major city in this country probably had 7 or 8 newspapers. Morning newspapers, mid-morning newspapers, news. I mean, you cannot imagine kids on every street corner with a new edition every couple of hours. Americans were overwhelmed with news, and it was really cheap, right? So RCA was saying to Americans, I know you're obsessed with news, but I have a really great idea. I have a very, very expensive large box, which is going to sit in the corner of your living room, which is going to give you more news, right? People were like, why do I need that? Totally uninterested in it. And then Sarnoff comes along and he says, this box is not about the news. Right? It's about an experience. It's about being able to participate in the most crucial, the most interesting, the most hyped sporting event of the year without leaving your house. And the minute he says that, a light bulb goes on in people's heads. And they say, oh, I get it now. This is something that I want. And that is the dawn of the radio age. Now, that's a crucial insight, because when you look at almost any kind of transformation of any reinvention of any industry, you will invariably find at the beginning of that process of reinvention this act of reframing, this moment when the nature of the issue or the problem facing the customer is reconceptualized, put into a form that allows them to completely reimagine and re-understand their relationship to the person trying to sell them the product. Now, that's what you're doing. Everyone in this room is engaged in that very same act of reframing, going to the kinds of people who use software services and say, you've been thinking about it like this over here, now we're going to think about it like that over here, right? And that is not a trivial transformation. Reframing, when it happens, is enormously significant and enormously difficult, right? It is something with enormous payoffs, but it's not easy.